I've heard a lot of negative feedback about Stasis in Lightfall. It's not good. It's outclassed. So, of course, I wanted to check it out for myself. Well, what I really wanted to do was check out Titan's new Stasis exotic and the Season 20 bow all at once, but I ended up talking about the helm for about 95% of this video. Before we look ahead, though, let's take a look at what was left behind and why people think Stasis is struggling. A big part of Stasis pre-Lightfall was the ability to create Stasis shards through a harvest aspect that all of the classes have. You can still do this now, but give me a sec. For example, Titans made Stasis shards whenever they shattered a Stasis crystal, and if you used my build from like over a year ago, this did and still does happen quite often. A Stasis shard gives you melee energy, but when you used the Elemental Shards mod, it turned shards into Elemental Wells. If your subclass and the Elemental Well that you picked up matched in their element, you got ability energy for all of your abilities as opposed to just one. Now, given how many shards you could generate, this gave very high uptime on your abilities. Elemental Charge was also a mod pre-Lightfall where picking up Elemental Wells gave you Charged with Light, or Armor Charge as we know it today. So it was really easy to gain lots of ability energy and then also convert Armor Charge into some kind of an effect. You can see how the two synergized quite nicely. Nowadays, both are gone and neither have any sort of replacement at this moment. Bungie is sort of bringing back Elemental Charge in Season 21 with a new mod that gives you a chance to get Armor Charge when picking up a shard. But right now, Stasis shards only grant melee energy, and for Titan, this can feel close to useless as their melee is slow, it doesn't deal a lot of damage, and half the time feels like it whiffs anyway. I feel like a lot of people are using it for mobility than the actual ability. Strand is also literally in the game and feels like it is slowly pushing Stasis out of frame. Strand does crowd control quite well, arguably better than Stasis in some areas, and Stasis feels pretty designed to be a crowd control subclass. I mean, look at the three main Strand builds for each class. All of them have incredibly high uptime on suspend effects, and suspend is just a better freeze when it comes purely to crowd control. Not only is the target completely helpless, and not only can you extend the duration of it through a fragment, but you can also shoot them a ton, and the crowd control doesn't break. Not only that, but Titans and Hunters easily have the ability to chain back to back to back to back to back suspend effects on targets. It's a bit harder to do this on Stasis, and the freeze effect breaks immediately upon damage. However, freeze and shatter do have their own benefits in the form of AoE damage and proccing other effects of their own, and are probably better than Tangles without the Tangles seasonal perk support purely in damage. I think Stasis's issue is also that Strand can go infinite pretty easily, not only ability chaining, but crowd control chaining. Why bother bringing Stasis to something like a GM when I can bring Strand and just bully every single champion nonstop? Something like Warlock Osmiomancy double freeze turrets is still really strong, I'm not saying it's not, but it's a little slow, it needs some time to build up, versus Strand, which is just LOL, class ability, suspend a bunch of stuff. That being said, I have messed around with Osmiomancy on Warlock, with and without Bleak Watcher, and it is still really, really good. Freeze puts in some serious overtime, and we can take a look at that in the future. It doesn't really feel fair to say much of this without actually trying a build or two. So I hopped on my Titan to try the new exotics. I'm sure I'm going to get the question of, why aren't you using Agar Scepter? And the answer is, we already know that Agar Scepter is really good. The bow is new. I want to try the bow. Let me try the bow. What does the Titan helmet do? Actually, quite a lot. Throwing a Diamond Lance creates Stasis crystals on impact when thrown, and will generate more if it's against anything more threatening than a red bar if you actually hit the target. And while using a Stasis subclass, and while behind your rally barricade, rapid crits and final blows with a Stasis weapon make a Diamond Lance right next to you, or technically like right on top of you. Note two things. Number one, You do not need to have the Diamond Lance aspect equipped in order to make Diamond Lances in this way, which is very convenient as it frees up an aspect. Number 2, the rapid crits do not need to be with a stasis weapon, and it's only about 2 or 3 crits to make this proc. I know the wording's a little weird, makes it seem like you need a stasis weapon. You don't. You just need the stasis weapon for final blows. And the new bow, Verglas Curve, not Verglas Curve, will build up Hail Barrage, aka stasis arrows, stacking up to 5 as you get final blows. Then you can hip fire to expend all charges at once in a single shot, which all turn into stasis crystals, which you can then shatter. If you hit a target, then the target will freeze. The hip fire arrow does not have nearly as much range as a typical arrow. It's going to fall down pretty quick, so there is a learning curve there, but there's also this quirk where if you don't 100% aim down sights first, even if that's what you meant to do, you're going to fire your hail barrage, so just be aware of that. But I also had a ton of fun with this bow regardless. Couple things to note about the bow. When you toss out your stasis bow shots, try to make crystals as opposed to hitting a target directly, even though I know that's what the catalyst says to do. When you make crystals and then shatter them, every kill you get within that shatter will give you an arrow. When you hit an enemy and shatter them, no matter how many things you kill with that shatter, you're only going to get 1 arrow. So use the arrows for crystals for AoE purposes. Now that being said, if you're on Whisper of Fissures, which is arguably the best fragment for this setup, there are wild inconsistency issues where sometimes the bow works and sometimes you get no arrows when shooting a crystal. I don't know what's happening. Hopefully Bungie can fix this, or maybe it's something else entirely. I don't know, but hopefully that gets addressed at some point. So, the initial goal here seems to be stand behind a rally barricade, shoot the bow, yeet our diamond lances, and just generally be causing havoc with stasis. Which brings us to our aspects. Normally, diamond lance would be here, but considering we'll be making them with our exotic, we don't technically need it, and I wouldn't take it when using this helm. We have literally just started to craft our build, and already I'm kind of annoyed, and that's because of Titan aspects. You see, 3 of the 4 Stasis Titan aspects revolve around your melee, or sprinting, or sliding, or just moving. Howl of the Storm is slide into your melee to do a thing. Tectonic Harvest is picking up shards, give you melee energy. Cryoclasm is your slide goes nuts and makes stasis crystals explode. Diamond Lance is not necessarily a melee-focused thing, but part of it is the fact that you can dive bomb and do a small freezing AoE. So I don't really want to invest that much into my melee when I'm using this setup because I have a mental block of I must be behind the barricade, because if I am not, then my exotic just turns into Diamond Lances make a crystal. But also we didn't take Diamond Lance, which means I need to be behind a rally to even make them in the first place. If I'm going to do some sort of stasis type build, it would behoove me to be a bit more mobile given all of the Titan aspects. All that being said, I would definitely pick Howl of the Storm to convert our melee into the crystal slide attack because, again, Behemoth melee is just not that great unless you want to use it exclusively as a mobility tool. Nowhere does a melee really fit into the goal of this kind of setup, much less entirely building around it. The amount of times I saw piles and piles of shards go to waste because I was stuck behind a rally was kind of a lot. Obviously, there is Whisper of Conduction, which makes it so shards track to you, and that's fine, but I personally would rather have more stuff that boosts the thing that I actually want to boost, which is, shatter damage and all that kind of stuff. And as we'll discuss, I'm not using my melee a ton in the content that I'll be featuring. Could you run back and forth to your barricade after meleeing stuff? Sure, but for the investment that I am almost forced to put into my melee, the payout does not seem worth it for using my melee. Howl is good, it ain't that good. Could I focus much less on the whole rally barricade thing? Yes, in lower end content where you're going to be constantly moving, you pretty much have to. But also, if I'm going to disregard half of the exotic or only use it sparingly, then I might as well just put Diamond Lance back on and switch off of this exotic completely. The 3 configurations we have are Howl and Tectonic, and we try to make Diamond Lances with the helmet, but that's our only way to make them. Diamond Lance and Howl, but we don't make shards for our melee, or Diamond Lance and Tectonic, but we have a terrible melee. Every configuration has a huge weakness, and while I'm normally okay with having to make this choice, this particular choice doesn't really feel great because the weakness feels worse than usual. I'm going to spare you on a lot of the details here. I'm just going to show you a build and just start talking because I got a good amount to say. Here's a build. Go nuts. In lower level content, Stasis is totally fine because it gets to act like a light subclass in that it actually kills stuff. But so does everything. I want to talk about the tougher stuff. What I did not enjoy about the experience with this bow-based setup in a Master Law Sector, I'm using the helm and the bow, is that it's so easy to get bullied out of a rally barricade while using the bow because bows are slow and Stasis has no healing effects other than like Rhyme for overshield stuff, Whisper of Rhyme. And if we don't have a rally barricade to stand behind, the exotic falls apart, which means you need to be hyper aware of the placement of your barricade at all times. So when you're trying to make Diamond Lances with this configuration, you'll really feel how slow it can be. Plus, orb generation also felt pretty slow. I swapped off the bow eventually. It was just too slow. Aggers was okay as well, but I honestly felt the most comfortable using no stasis weapons at all. The Diamond Lance procs really fast on rapid hits. You only need a couple of hits, which is why Verglas felt so painful, but a pulse rifle was totally fine. And once I released myself from the idea that I needed to be stacking all of these stasis weapons, even Agger's Scepter, although that's more of a personal thing, I enjoyed myself so much more and the build was performing so much better. I was using the Howl and Tectonic configuration, but was also just generally accepting that I wasn't going to be using Howl that much, or I was just going to be using it defensively. Most times, when I tried to force a Howl melee, it just didn't end up being a smart idea, or at the least a benefit to my gameplay, because Howl is also, you know, it's not that great, but it's definitely better than the base melee. Stasis, again, no healing, a little overshield potential, and no Strand-like defense. When I'm so much more powerful from behind a rally, the incentive for me to run up and do a dinky slide freeze thing is just not there at all. Like, why put myself in danger like that? In lower difficulty stuff, it's much more feasible to Howl slide attack, but I don't think I would even run this in lower difficulty stuff. I don't want to be sitting behind a rally in easier content. There's no need to play that safe. I'd rather just switch to Diamond Lance itself and jump around and have a good time. I'm pretty much only going to be using this configuration in content where I know I can fortify a position for at least a little while, and that fortification is actually important to gameplay. If I'm in lower level content, I'm just going back to the Shatter build I made over a year ago. That build's still really fun. It's really solid, good damage. Obviously, we're missing some mods from the past, but the core of the build is still just making crystals and shooting them. Heart of Inmost Light, Hoarfrost. You could also use this helm and just throw on Diamond Lance. Take your pick. The Shatter build, the one that I made a year ago, is where I felt much more comfortable using the bow. It felt way more fun here because the fun factor is stacking those arrows as quick as possible and then shattering everything and killing everything, and just, it's so much fun. You're not really doing that in Master or GM content. It's so much slower. It's so much more meticulous. But you are mowing down enemies like crazy in season content, so that's really cool. What's the verdict on the helm then? Well, originally, I was pretty down on it, but that's because I was trying to force a square block into a round hole. But after trying some different weaponry out, talking with some people, I do think that this helmet is probably better than the other stasis options in high-end content for Titans, stuff that's 15 or more levels above you, with smart and conservative play. I also wonder what the gameplay would be like if this helmet reduced the cooldown on generating Diamond Lances if they are generated from behind a rally, because that cooldown is still there. It's mainly just that Stasis itself, at least on Titan, and from what I've been hearing, Hunter as well, is just not really that strong right now when compared to the light subclasses. Whenever we have a situation in the game where damage is a better crowd control than actual crowd control, then Stasis is gonna feel not as good. That's why it feels good in lower level content. It gains the destructive power of a light subclass because things are easier to kill. Also, in seasons that don't have any sort of Stasis surge effect or season mods, it can feel tough to justify using, although that's not exactly a Stasis exclusive problem. Stasis lack of healing and defense hurts when we live in a world full of restoration and overshields and debuffs and all this other stuff. The opportunity costs are high to use Stasis. The defense you get is supposed to be through freezes and crowd control, but when Strand can do that arguably better, why not just go for Strand? It's not like Stasis is downright terrible or anything. You can still have a lot of success with Stasis in mid-tier and even higher-tier stuff. But you can also just mow things down with a machine gun and call it a day. You know what I mean? Elemental charges could change things up in Season 21. But it will ultimately depend on the rate at which you can get armor charge from shards. If you're able to somewhat replicate the experience from pre-Lightfall, consistently getting a lot of charge, then I think that could definitely help Stasis in the long run. So that's what I got on Stasis Titan at the moment with the new exotic and sort of the bow, I guess. I definitely want to run some Warlock stuff soon, so maybe we'll get to that next. Let me know how you're feeling about Stasis. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.